The dusty streets of Dusty Ridge, Wyoming seem quieter than usual. The wind picks up, swaying through the narrow alleys between the wooden storefronts. It carries the scent of hay, pine wood, and the faint reminder of an unspoken past. As you walk through the town square, everything seems still, as if the land itself is holding its breath, waiting for something to change. But it's not just the land, it's the people too. Hidden behind the creaky windows and behind closed doors, there's a world of unspoken emotions, lost dreams, and heartaches that no one dares to talk about. And then, one simple question shatters the stillness. Can you be my date for one day? Now, that question might sound like something out of a light-hearted story, but it's not. The man asking it is no stranger to hardship. He's not just looking for a date. He's looking for someone to fill a void in his life, to make things feel normal again. But the woman he's asking is not just any stranger. She's the one person he never thought he'd meet in a town like this, his daughter's teacher. And this isn't just any ordinary love story. This is a tale of second chances, healing, and a chance to find home when you least expect it. Dusty Ridge, nestled in the heart of Wyoming, has long been a place of rugged survival, a small town where the past and the present seem forever intertwined, and people live quietly with their secrets. Wade Coloulton, a widowed rancher, has spent the last 3 years with his young daughter Rosie, trying to keep their ranch running and their lives together. But his heart? It's been broken. He's a man trapped in his grief, and it's starting to eat away at him. He's a man who has long given up on the idea of finding love again. But then, one chance encounter, one unexpected question, begins a journey that neither he nor June Hartley, the woman he asks, will ever forget. Wade Coloulton, the lonely rancher. Wade Coloulton is 33, strong and hardworking, but the weight of his past keeps him anchored in a life that feels more like survival than living. His ranch is thriving, cattle grazing peacefully on wide, green pastures, the barn sturdy and well-maintained. From the outside, he's everything a rancher should be. But behind those broad shoulders and under that well-worn cowboy hat, Wade is a man lost in grief, hiding from the world and the emotions he can't seem to shake. 3 years ago, Wade's life turned upside down when he lost his wife during childbirth. The loss left him with a hole in his heart so wide that nothing seemed capable of filling it. His daughter Rosie was a reminder of his lost love, and while she was his world, the joy she once brought him now felt like an echo of something too painful to keep close. Rosie was a quiet child, withdrawn and painfully shy. After her mother's death, Rosie stopped speaking to others, lost in her own world, where only a few things could comfort her: the stable dog, a worn rocking chair, and her father. Wade tried time and time again to reach her, but the walls she built around herself were far too high for him to climb. Life became routine. Every morning they had breakfast in silence, the only sound being the scraping of utensils against plates. Even the weather seemed to reflect his mood, gray and overcast, much like the sky of his soul. Wade knew he had to find a way to get through to Rosie, but nothing he tried seemed to make a difference. And then, as if the universe decided it was time to change the course of his life, Rosie refused to attend the harvest blessing ceremony in 3 days. The harvest blessing was a town tradition where families gathered to celebrate the harvest and give thanks for what they had. It was a day meant for family, and no child stood alone. But Rosie had made it clear, "I won't go if there's no mama." Wade's heart sank. The unspoken rule of the harvest blessing meant that Rosie would have to stay behind, alone, if he didn't find a way to help her. Desperation clawed at him. He couldn't let her spend this important day alone. The thought of her staying in the shadows of grief broke him, and it was in that moment that Wade knew he had to make a choice, one that would change everything. He needed help, someone to stand by Rosie and pretend to be her mother, just for a day. Enter June Hartley, the unexpected ally. That's when Wade saw her. June Hartley. She stood in the doorway of the general store, her auburn hair soaked from the rain, hands clenched at her sides as she argued with Mr. Grayson, the local dry goods owner. She had the kind of fiery spirit that Wade wasn't used to seeing in the women of Dusty Ridge. Most women in town had a quiet strength, but June's confidence was different. She wasn't afraid to speak her mind, to stand her ground, and it caught Wade's attention. As he watched from across the square, he saw something in her that he hadn't seen in years. Someone who was unafraid to face difficult situations, someone who could stand up to the storm. He didn't know why, but something about her felt right. Maybe it was that unwavering determination in her eyes, or maybe it was the way she didn't let herself be intimidated. Either way, Wade knew she could be the one to help him. With the weight of the situation pressing on him, Wade made his move. He walked up to June and tipped his hat. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying the awkwardness of a man unused to asking for help. She glanced up at him, raising an eyebrow in curiosity. He cleared his throat and without further hesitation blurted, "I need someone to pretend to be my daughter's mother for one day. Just for the harvest blessing. I'll pay you handsomely." June's eyes narrowed slightly. She wasn't one to jump into situations like this, especially with a stranger, and the offer felt too good to be true. "Excuse me?" she asked, confused by the request. Wade, sensing her hesitation, pulled an envelope from his coat. The weight of it was enough to make anyone's eyes widen. "It's enough to clear your debt with Grayson," he said, "and more." For a moment, June stood there, unsure. But something about the man's quiet desperation tugged at her. It wasn't just the money. There was a hidden pain in his eyes, something raw and vulnerable that made her want to help. "I'm not an actress," she said, shaking her head. "I don't pretend." "I'm not asking you to pretend to be something you're not," Wade replied softly. "I'm asking you to be kind to a little girl who doesn't have anyone else." The journey to the ranch. June hesitated, then nodded slowly. She wasn't sure what she was getting into, but the chance to help someone in need, especially a little girl, was enough to push her into the decision. They saddled their horses and rode out of Dusty Ridge. The trail was quiet, the only sound being the soft clip-clop of hooves on the dirt. The journey to Wade's ranch was long, and the tension between them was thick. Wade kept his gaze fixed ahead, lost in his thoughts, while June watched him, wondering what had driven him to this point. He was a man with a past, one that seemed to have locked away his heart. As the mist began to lift and the sun peeked over the hills, June couldn't help but notice the beauty of the land. Rolling pastures stretched as far as the eye could see, and the ranch house stood proudly at the base of the hills, surrounded by tall fences and grazing cattle. It was a peaceful place, but there was an undeniable sense of sorrow hanging in the air. Wade led the way up the dirt road, and as they neared the porch, a small voice rang out. "Papa?" Rosie's voice cut through the silence, and Wade turned, his heart lifting at the sight of his daughter running toward him. But what happened next surprised them both. Instead of running to Wade, Rosie ran straight into June's arms, wrapping her little arms around her waist. June stood there, stunned, unsure of how to react. Rosie looked up at her with those big, trusting eyes and said, "This is my teacher. She's going to be my mama." Wade froze. He stared at June, wide-eyed, as the realization hit him. This wasn't just a one-time deal for Rosie. There was something real here, something neither he nor June had expected. Neither of them knew it yet, but this one day would change everything. A silent connection between June and Rosie. As the days passed on the ranch, something unexpected began to blossom. June found herself growing closer to Rosie in a way that felt both natural and surprising. The little girl, once so quiet and withdrawn, began to open up, sharing her thoughts and feelings in a way that June hadn't anticipated. One afternoon, as June knelt down to plant marigolds along the front porch, Rosie sat nearby, watching her every move. The little girl was fascinated by the way June's hands moved with such ease, as if she belonged there. It wasn't just the gardening that caught Rosie's attention, it was June herself. There was something about the calm, gentle way June interacted with the world that seemed to resonate deeply with Rosie, like a missing puzzle piece had finally been found. Rosie had always been quiet, preferring solitude, but in June's presence she found comfort and trust. "Do you think they'll grow?" Rosie asked softly, her small voice breaking through the stillness. June smiled as she patted the earth around the marigolds. "They'll grow just fine. And soon enough, we'll have a lovely garden to show off." Rosie's eyes lit up at the thought. "Will we have more flowers, like the ones at the church?" "Maybe more than that," June replied, her voice gentle but full of promise. She had no idea how much that simple conversation meant to Rosie. Wade, who had been watching them from the porch, couldn't help but feel a deep sense of relief. The tension between him and Rosie had always been there, and seeing her so comfortable around June was a small but important step forward. It was a sign that despite all the pain, they were healing. He thought back to the moment when he had first asked June to pretend to be Rosie's mother. At that time, he never expected that a simple favor would lead to something like this, a bond that neither of them could ignore. For June, though, the experience was just as surprising. She'd been running from her past for so long, trying to escape the whispers, the judgment, and the guilt that had followed her from town to town. But in Rosie's eyes, June saw something she hadn't seen in years: acceptance, trust, the kind of trust that felt like a lifeline. For the first time in a long time, June allowed herself to feel something she had long buried: hope, unveiling the truth. One evening, as the sun began to set over the hills, painting the sky in hues of pink and orange, Wade and June sat on the porch, the air heavy with unspoken words. Rosie had already gone to bed, her soft breathing drifting through the open window. The quiet stretched between them until June finally broke the silence, her voice hesitant but clear. "I don't know how to say this," she began, her hands folding nervously in her lap. "But I wasn't always who I am now. Back in my old town, they weren't easy. A boy went missing, and I was the last person to see him." Her gaze fell to the floor, avoiding Wade's eyes. "The rumors never stopped. Even after I was cleared of any wrongdoing, people wouldn't let it go. That's why I left." Wade sat in silence, absorbing her words. He had suspected there was more to June than met the eye, but hearing her speak of it with such vulnerability made him realize just how much pain she carried. He didn't judge her. His heart, heavy with grief and regret, understood the weight of living with secrets. "You stayed here after all that?" Wade asked quietly, his voice thick with both curiosity and compassion. June nodded, her gaze distant. "I came here to disappear, to start over, but then I met Rosie, and she..." She paused, struggling to find the words. "She didn't judge me. She just accepted me. And that's something I didn't think was possible anymore." Wade's heart tightened as he watched June, her shoulders sagging with the burden of her past. He realized just how much they had in common. They were both people who had been weighed down by loss, people trying to heal, trying to move forward. And just when Wade thought the conversation would end, something unexpected happened. Rosie, who had been listening from the doorway, shyly stepped out and handed June a small drawing she had been working on. It was a picture of a family, a stick-figure father with a wide-brimmed hat, a woman with long hair, and a little girl with a big smile. The three figures were holding hands under a large sun. "This is my family," Rosie whispered softly, her voice barely above a breath. The simplicity of the drawing hit both Wade and June harder than anything else could. In that moment, they both realized what had been happening all along. Rosie, in her quiet way, had already accepted June as part of their family. She saw her not as a stranger, not as someone playing a role, but as someone she could trust. Wade felt a lump form in his throat. "I didn't know she felt that way," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. June blinked back tears. "I didn't either. But she's right. This is my family now, facing the town's judgment." The morning of the harvest blessing arrived, and Dusty Ridge was abuzz with excitement. The streets were lined with booths, orange ribbons tied to wooden posts, and families gathered to prepare for the day's festivities. It was a time of celebration, a time for families to come together and give thanks. But for Wade, June, and Rosie, it was a day filled with uncertainty. As they made their way into town, the whispers began. The townsfolk, who had long known Wade as the widowed rancher, couldn't help but notice the woman at his side. "Who is she?" one person whispered. "Is that Wade with a woman?" another murmured. But June wasn't fazed. She had already decided she wasn't going to let the judgment of others define her. She wasn't there for the town's approval, she was there for Rosie. As the three of them walked into the town square, hand in hand, June held her head high, proud to be standing next to Rosie, proud to be a part of something that was beginning to feel real. Wade, however, couldn't ignore the eyes that followed them. He felt the weight of the town's scrutiny, and it unsettled him. But as he looked down at June, he realized that this wasn't just about them anymore. This was about their family, and nothing else mattered. The moment of truth. As the harvest blessing ceremony came to a close, Wade and June found themselves standing together, surrounded by the warmth of the people of Dusty Ridge. Wade, who had been so determined to keep his distance from the world, felt something shift within him. The grief he had been carrying for so long no longer defined him. His heart, once closed off, now open to the possibility of something new. And in that moment, he looked at June, really looked at her, and he knew he had to ask her something. "Can you be my family forever?" he asked, his voice steady but filled with emotion. June's heart raced as she processed his words. She wasn't just being asked to play a part anymore. Wade was asking her to stay, not as a favor, not as a role, but as someone who was truly a part of their lives. But could she? Could she open her heart to this life, to this love, the heartfelt resolution? That night, after the harvest blessing, the air in the Coloulton home felt different. The faint warmth from the evening sun streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the room. Wade and June sat by the fire, its flickering light dancing on their faces, as Rosie slept soundly in her room, her small breathing steady and peaceful. The fire crackled softly, and for the first time in a long time, the house didn't feel empty. It didn't feel like the hollow shell of grief that Wade had been living in for the past 3 years. It felt warm, alive. Wade stared at the fire, his thoughts racing. It wasn't just the question he had asked earlier, "Can you be my family forever?" but what it meant, what it would mean for his daughter, for June, and for him. Could he truly open his heart again? Could he let go of the past and embrace something new? June sat beside him, her eyes soft, reflecting the light of the fire. She had been so sure of herself before, strong, self-reliant, but now she wasn't so sure. Her life had been a series of running away, running from her past, running from the whispers, the rumors, the judgment. She had told herself that she would never let anyone close again, that she could survive on her own. But here she was, sitting next to a man who had lost everything, and a little girl who had found trust in her when no one else could. June realized that for the first time in years, she wasn't just surviving, she was living. "Wade," she began softly, her voice barely above a whisper, "I never expected any of this. I thought I'd be alone forever, that I would never belong anywhere. And then I met Rosie, and you, and now I don't know what's real anymore." Wade turned to her, his gaze intense. "June, I never planned for any of this either. But somewhere, between you and Rosie, something changed. I'm not the same man I was before. You've both made me see that. And now I need you to know that this is real. I'm not asking you to pretend anymore. I'm asking you to stay, not because of some obligation, but because you and Rosie, you're both a part of my life now." June looked into his eyes, and for the first time, she saw a man who wasn't just a father or a rancher. He was someone who was ready to take a chance, to open his heart. She had never seen this side of him, and it was a side she was beginning to care about deeply, but she still held back, unsure whether she could truly embrace what he was offering. "Wade," she said softly, "I'm scared. Scared that I'm not enough. That maybe this isn't what I deserve." Wade reached out, taking her hand gently in his. His touch was warm, grounding her in the moment. "June, you are enough. You always have been. I just didn't see it. I didn't see you for who you really are until now. You're not some role I need. You're someone I need in my life and in Rosie's. We need you." The warmth of his words settled into her heart, and for the first time, June allowed herself to breathe. It wasn't perfect. They had both been through too much to expect that, but it was real, and that was all that mattered now. That night, as they sat in silence, the crackle of the fire filling the space around them, June made a decision. She wasn't going to run anymore. She wasn't going to let fear control her. She was going to stay, not because she had to, but because she wanted to, because she could finally see a future, one where she was part of something, part of a family. The next morning, as the first rays of sunlight spilled across the horizon, June stood on the porch, looking out at the rolling fields of Dusty Ridge. She felt the warmth of the sun on her skin, but more importantly, she felt the warmth in her heart. This was her new beginning. Wade came outside and stood next to her, his hand brushing against hers. She looked at him and smiled, a real, genuine smile. They didn't need to speak. Everything they needed to say was already in the air, in their touch, in their eyes. They were a family now, and nothing, no fear or doubt, could take that away. Captivating ending. As the days passed, things changed. The house, once filled with the echoes of sorrow, was now alive with laughter and the sound of everyday life. June helped Rosie with her schoolwork, something that was no longer a chore but a joy. Rosie, who had once been a quiet, withdrawn child, now ran through the house with a bright smile, her laughter ringing through the halls. Wade and June spent more time together, talking about everything and nothing. Wade took her horseback riding through the hills, showing her the beauty of the land he had worked so hard to build. And at night, they sat together under the stars, sharing stories of their pasts, their dreams, and their hopes for the future. One evening, after a day spent working together on the ranch, Wade took June's hand in his. They stood in the middle of the field, looking out at the sunset painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. The air was warm, and the sound of the wind through the grass was peaceful. "June," Wade said softly, "I asked you to be my family forever, but I don't think I need to ask anymore. You already are." Tears welled up in June's eyes, but this time they were tears of joy, of relief, and of love. She looked up at him and smiled, her heart full. "You're right," she whispered. "We are family." And just like that, they knew. The past was behind them, and a future full of love and possibility stretched before them. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. There would be challenges, there would be hard days, but together they could face anything. They had found something real, something that couldn't be broken. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Wade, June, and Rosie stood together, hand in hand, looking out at the future. A family not by blood, but by choice. And in that moment, they knew they had everything they needed. And so, from the question Wade once asked, "Can you be my date for one day?" came a love that healed 3 broken hearts, one step at a time. What started as a simple request born out of desperation had turned into something more. From pretend to promise, from strangers to family. Dusty Ridge had become more than just a town. It was their home. And in each other, they had found everything they had been looking for.